Our movie opens with Bob, and Bob is a CIA officer working to stop illegal arms dealing in the Middle East. Bob is now in Tehran to meet up with Arash, an arms dealer in a club. Arash offers Bob to try liquid MDMA. Bob refuses, sticking to his whiskey. Bob is meeting up with Arash to sell anti-craft missiles, and Bob is eager to make the deal as soon as possible. After the party, Bob and Arash go to an empty restaurant to hand off the weapons. Bob sets up the weapons and gives it to Arash, but Arash takes one of the weapons to the back room and gives it to another person. Bob is concerned. He asks Arash why he's not taking both, but Arash tells him not to worry about it and just leaves. Once Arash leaves, Bob goes to the back room and sees the other weapon was actually given to an Egyptian man. And the Egyptian man puts a gun on Bob's face and tells him to leave. Bob, scared, decides to leave the place. And Arash and his associates take their weapon and put it on their car, but before they can drive, the weapon blows up, killing all of them. In our next scene, we see people in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. Mr. Whiting meets up with Bennett. Whiting is partner in this DC-based law firm, and he's hired Bennett to help with the merger of Connex Oil with Killen. These are two oil companies, and Connex happens to be a very big one. Killen is a very small one, but has the right to drill in the untapped country of Kazakhstan. And the Connex are losing oil fields in the Persian Gulf Kingdom ruled by the Al-Subaai family. And the family has granted oil drilling to the rights of a Chinese company, undermining the US oil industry and the US government. Because of this loss, Connex have found a small company to merge with who somehow got the rights to drill in Kazakhstan. Whiting believes that Killen has bribed someone to get the drillings in Kazakhstan, and the DOJ is also suspicious. And if the DOJ finds corruption, the merger would be stopped. Whiting tells Bennett to find the issues in the merger and fix them before the DOJ finds anything. Bennett, now tasked with solving this issue with the merger, meets up with Connex and Killen executives. In Geneva, Switzerland, Bryan works as an analyst for the American energy company. While at work, Bryan's supervisor gives him an invitation to attend a private party hosted by the Emir, a prince, basically in Arabic. And this party is happening in Spain, Marbella. Bryan's company is interested in working as energy analysts for the oil-rich family. Bryan's supervisor tells him to take his family with him and use this time as a vacation also. In the Persian Gulf, the Chinese fire all the workers, including Pakistani migrant workers, Salim Ahmed Khan and his son Wasim, and they're given 2 weeks to find another job or they'll be deported. In the CIA's headquarters, Bob's superiors are nervous because Bob has been writing memos about the missile theft by the Egyptians. And so, Bob has been called back to the US and reassigned to a desk job. He meets with his superiors for a debrief, and the woman asks him about his opinion about Iran. The US has been trying to infiltrate Iran for years now. And Bob tells her Iran is not going to be infiltrated easily and that the Ayatollahs are not going to surrender control over their country. Here it's revealed that Bob is not just in some normal meeting. It's the meeting of the Committee of the Liberation of Iran. And the committee tells Bob that the reform effort in Iran is the most important issue for the president right now, and it's crucial for the petroleum security of the US. Meanwhile in Spain, Bryan has arrived to the Emir's party with his 2 sons and his wife. The Emir is having a meeting with the Chinese company representatives, and they're signing a big deal to make the 2 countries allies. Bryan is waiting to have his meeting with the Emir, but the Emir's representatives tell him that the Emir is sick for the time being, but that they also have the authority to listen to his proposal. Bryan tells the men his pitch and how he can help them maximize their growth since the price of oil has been falling. At the same time, the Emir's youngest son, Prince Nasir, shows the estate to the Chinese using remote control cameras. I don't know why anyone is impressed by this, but it's apparently an impressive scene. We're shown on the camera that there's a crack on the swimming pool electrifying the water, and Bryan's older son Max is playing outside with the other kids. The kid plays a game with him, telling him that he's a shark and to jump in the pool. Max jumps in the pool and gets electrified by the water. Julie, his mother, sees Max shouting to cut the power, and Bryan also arrives at the pool. And once they cut off the power, Bryan jumps in and brings Max out of the pool, but it was too late because Max has apparently died. And Max's funeral is held shortly in Switzerland, and Julie hasn't fully accepted that her son is dead. Bryan tries to go back to work, but his boss tells him to take some time off. And while getting ready to go home, an assistant tells Bryan that the prince has called and wants to have a meeting with him. Bryan has gone back in the US after Max's death, and he tells her that he has to do his job and stay in Geneva. In the Persian Gulf, Wasim looks for a job, but he's rejected from every job he applied to. He's told by one of the people to learn Arabic to get a job. Wasim and his friend join a madrasa, which is like a school, and they decide to learn Arabic. But their teacher, who's also an Islamic fundamentalist, who's apparently the same man that has the missing missile, approaches Wasim and his friend and teaches them his way. In Washington, Bennett meets with the head of the DOJ to convince them to approve the merger, but the DOJ is still very suspicious of Killen, and they're holding off on the merger until it's cleared. Mr. Whiting sets up a meeting with the Emir's youngest son, and he threatens him that if the country doesn't give their oil rights back to the US so that the US can drill there, that they might have to invade them. But he also promises Mashal that if he agrees to this deal, Mashal would be the king once his sick father passes away. In the CIA, Bob's superiors, Fred and Jane, call him and tell him that there's a new job for him. They show him evidence of Prince Nasir, the Emir's oldest son, is apparently financing terrorist groups that could attack the US. And the CIA also believe Prince Nasir is the person ordering the Egyptians that have the missing missiles. They tell Bob to go to Beirut, Lebanon to find and kill Prince Nasir. Before going to Beirut, Bob meets with his ex-CIA friend Stan, who's done several missions in Lebanon. When he asks him if Lebanon is safe, Stan advises Bob to clear his presence with the Hezbollah, which is a Lebanese militant group. And he needs to clear his presence there so that they don't think he's there to attack them. In the Persian Gulf, Bryan meets with Prince Nasir, and Nasir gives Bryan $75 million and a park with Max's name as reparations and out of sympathy for the loss of his son. Nasir then asks Bryan to become his country's financial advisor. Bryan is insulted by the first offer, but still agrees to work for Nasir. He agrees to it because this is kind of the biggest job he's ever gotten. And meanwhile, Bob arrives at Beirut, and when he enters Hezbollah's territory, he gets abducted by a group of people. They blindfold him and take him to the Hezbollah leader. The leader tells Bob that he has a soft spot for Americans, and then he asks Bob why he is there. Bob tells the leader that he has a business proposal from Moussawi, a mercenary that gave the whereabouts of Prince Nasir to the CIA. Bob also explains that he has no interest in Hezbollah and that he's just there for business. Bob meets with Moussawi. Bob shows Moussawi the picture of Nasir, and Moussawi tells Bob that Nasir is in Beirut now and gives him his location of the hotel Nasir will be staying at. Bob then hires Moussawi to help him kidnap and kill Nasir, and Moussawi agrees to do the job. Prince Nasir and Bryan have arrived at Beirut, and when they get inside an elevator, Bob enters with them. Nasir asks Bob if he's American, and Bob tells him that he's actually Canadian. The interaction gets a little awkward, but nothing happens. Bob goes to his hotel room and watches Nasir, who's in the opposite room. Bob is waiting for Moussawi's team to kidnap Nasir, but 4 masked men break into Bob's room and they kidnap him. When Bob wakes up, he finds himself tied on a chair. Moussawi enters the room and it's revealed Moussawi has become an Iranian agent, and the information he gave to the CIA was to abduct Bob to get information out of him. Moussawi tortures Bob and asks him to give the names of the CIA agents, but Bob refuses to give him the names. And Moussawi gets impatient and prepares to behead Bob, but the Hezbollah leader arrives and stops him. And the news of Bob's abduction has reached Fred and Jane, and they learn that Moussawi is planning to broadcast the CIA's intentions to kill Prince Nasir. Jane and Fred go to their boss Terry and tell him about the situation. Terry comes up with an idea to deny knowing about Bob's activities and to use him as a scapegoat by portraying Bob as a rogue officer acting without the approval of the CIA. Now back to Wasim's story. His teacher has been training him to be his follower, and he takes Wasim to a house and shows him the stolen missile. In Washington, D.C., Bennett has found a wire transfer made from a Killen executive, Dalton, to Kazakh officials. And from this he figures out that this is some kind of bribe and informs the Connex Killen executives about it. The executives obviously pretend that they didn't know about this, and Bennett warns them that Dalton will likely be charged with a crime and that they should keep far away from Dalton. In Geneva, Nasir and Bryan have come back from Beirut. Nasir heard the news that his father, the Emir, has registered with the Americans. Nasir confronts his father, and the Emir explains that he's very sick and he doesn't want to fight America. And Prince Nasir asks his father who he chose as his successor. His father, the Emir, reveals that he's chosen his youngest son, Mishal. Apparently, Mishal has been pushing his father to work with the Americans as well, and his father has chosen him to be the next Emir. Nasir is very angry by this and argues that his brother doesn't know anything about running a country. Nasir also reveals to Bryan that he planned to use his country's oil profits to diversify his economy. He also wants to change the political system and change it from a monarchy to a parliamentary system and give women the right to vote. Bryan tells him if he wants that, he needs to go fast since the Americans don't want a strong country that's not dependent on them, and they want the leaders to spend the nation's money on expensive planes and other unnecessary crap until they suck them dry for their national resources. Nasir asks Bryan to work with him closely to rebuild his country, and Bryan joins him. Meanwhile, back in DC, Don, the Attorney General investigating the merger, finds Bennett while he is jogging. And Don tells him that he knows that Killen is corrupt and threatens to stop the merger if he doesn't give him a name. Bennett tells Don about the wire transfer Dalton did, but Don tells him Dalton is not enough and he needs a bigger person that's involved in this corruption. Bennett then goes to meet up with the CEO of Killen, Jimmy Pope. He informs Jimmy that the DOJ needs a second person in order to drop the investigation and approve the merger. Jimmy asks Bennett what if they give the DOJ someone that works at the law firm that also knew about the corruption. Bennett agrees if the name is big enough, the merger will happen. Bennett then meets up with his boss Sydney, and they go to meet up with the CEO of Connex, Leyland. And there, Bennett reveals that Sydney has made an under-the-table deal while the Connex Killen merger was happening. And Sydney's confused by this and tries to stop him, but it was already too late and Bennett has given Sydney to the DOJ, and now, finally, the merger can happen. And Bob arrives back at the US, but he finds that he's actually under investigation and his passports have all been revoked and he's locked out of his computer at work. He finds Fred and asks him what's going on, but Fred doesn't give him an answer. Bob then goes to his friend Stan and asks him for the information. Stan reveals Whiting, working on behalf of the group, the Committee to Liberate Iran, is the one responsible for Bob's investigation and the plan to assassinate Nasir. When Bob learns this, he meets up with Whiting and threatens to kill both his wife and children if Whiting doesn't drop the investigation into him. Whiting, knowing Bob's skills, agrees to drop the investigation and to give Bob his passport back. Bob then returns to the Gulf to find Prince Nasir. Back in the Persian Gulf, Nasir has convinced his nation's generals to side with him instead of his younger brother. And the CIA get wind that Nasir will be taking the throne soon, and they start to plan to kill him with airstrikes. Bryan was sitting with Nasir, but he offers his seat to Nasir's wife for the family to travel together. And the CIA is following Nasir's car to drone strike him once they get a chance. At the same time, the Connex Killen merger has been approved and they're having a party. And the CEO of Connex also wins Oil Man of the Year. And Prince Mishal is also honored on the party for his cooperation of giving back the drilling rights back to the Americans. As Nasir is traveling to the capital, Bob approaches his convoy waving a white flag. The CIA sees the new car coming and they ready their drones. Bob comes out of the car and rushes to Nasir to tell him about the assassination. Nasir opens his car window, and when he sees Bob, he remembers him from the elevator. But before he can get out of the car, the CIA orders the drone strike, killing both Bob, Nasir, and his family. Bryan, who was sitting in another car, survives the bombing, and then he goes home to his wife and son. Lastly, Wasim is told that he's ready for a mission, and he takes a boat with his friend and he offs himself with the same missile that was stolen, and he takes out the Connex Killen oil tanker ship. In the last scene, Wasim blowing up that tanker is played for new students at the Arabic school. And that is how the movie ends. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Make sure to leave a like and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys on my next recap. Bye.